In a previous post, we looked at the character of Judas Iscariot in the Gospel of Mark. Today, we will see how he is portrayed in Matthew's Gospel. Most experts believe that Matthew was written after Mark, probably in the 80 CE. And because Matthew agrees with Mark word for word in many places, Matthew almost certainly used Mark as a source. This means that he would have had access to Mark's portrayal of Judas, which is significant for us as we start comparing the gospel accounts of him in later discussions. So today we will observe that Mark largely agrees with Matthew, or should I say Matthew largely agrees with Mark's portrayal of Judas, but he also includes some more details than Mark does. Like Mark, Matthew mentions Judas during the calling of the disciples, and then mentions the process of his betrayal of Jesus. Let us examine each appearance in the Gospel of Matthew, one after the other. Like Mark, Matthew first mentions Judas Iscariot when listing the names of the 12 disciples. He lists Judas last, just like Mark does, saying, "who also betrayed him." Whether Matthew assumes that his readers know about Judas already is difficult to know. However, if we agree with many historical critics, then we can understand Matthew's Gospel as addressing a particular community of Christians. This would imply that his church members knew something about the basic outline of Jesus' life as passed on by oral tradition in preaching. In other words, they would have known something about Judas already, probably. For example, we already know from Paul's letters that there was an oral tradition about Jesus' breaking bread on the same night in which he was betrayed. From this, we can infer that Jesus' betrayal was an early part of the preaching about him. So it is likely that new believers would have known about the story already. So since Matthew mentions Judas early in the narrative, he's probably just highlighting him as the betrayer so that the readers can anticipate what they already know will happen. Again, I think this is a similar thing to what Mark is doing. So let's go to the second appearance. Matthew's Gospel then tells most of the story of Jesus without referring to Judas at all. Then he narrates Judas's trip to the chief priests to hand Jesus over to them. The text goes like this: "Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went unto the chief priests, and said unto them, What will ye give me, and I will deliver him unto you? And they covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he sought opportunity to betray him." Like Mark, Matthew has Judas approach the chief priests. But unlike Mark, Matthew narrates that Judas specifically asks for compensation. And unlike Mark, Matthew states the exact amount that the authorities promised to give him. It is not easy to determine why Matthew includes those 2 extra details that are not included in Mark. Either he heard a tradition unknown to Mark about the price paid to Judas, or in keeping with some ancient literary conventions, he wrote an amount that he thought was realistic. But it's hard to tell, and that's not something that I've studied very closely, so maybe someone has written about that already. So let's go to the third appearance. Things get more interesting when we examine the scene of the Last Supper, which is the third place that Judas appears. Matthew's version of this scene includes more conversation than Mark's Gospel. Most importantly, we can see more interaction between Jesus and Judas. The KJV text appears below. "Now when the even was come, he sat down with the 12, and as they did eat, he said, Verily I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceeding sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? And he answered and said, He that dippeth his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. The Son of Man goeth as it is written of him, but woe unto that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had not been born. Then Judas, which betrayed him, answered and said, Master, is it I? He said unto him, Thou hast said." As you can see, in Matthew, Jesus predicts that one of his disciples will betray him, just as he does in the other Gospels. But here Judas also says, Master, is it I? And Jesus affirms his answer. From a narrative critical perspective, it is interesting to think about why Judas asks that question after he has already visited the chief priests to discuss the betrayal. Matthew's purpose behind this is hard to discern. Judas then disappears from the narrative, only to reappear shortly thereafter with the armed crowd that arrives by night to arrest Jesus. The outcome is similar to Mark's coverage, as you can see by reading the text below. And while he yet spake, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves, from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, Whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he, hold him fast. And forthwith he came to Jesus, and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. And Jesus said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they, and laid hands on Jesus, and took him. This version of the arrest has an interesting short conversation between Judas and Jesus. First, Judas greets Jesus with a kiss, and then Jesus calls Judas his friend, and asks him why he has come. We must assume that Matthew intends Jesus' question to be rhetorical because he predicted Judas' betrayal in advance, both at the Last Supper and just before Judas' arrival. We will now examine Judas' final appearance in the Gospel according to Matthew. This scene is fascinating because it describes what happened to Judas after the betrayal was complete. This is something that does not appear in Mark's account. Matthew describes Judas' fate in the following way. Then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself, and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, What is that to us? See thou to that. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple, and departed, and went, and hanged himself. We can see something quite grim and remarkable here. Judas regrets his actions, not because of any consequence that he endures, but because he realizes that he has betrayed an innocent person to be condemned. He gives up the money that the authorities had given him, and he hangs himself. It is a sad ending for even the most wicked of people. Is Matthew attempting to evoke sympathy for Judas from the reader by including this scene? While it is impossible to tell for sure, I have a feeling that this may be the case. However, it is just as likely that he is illustrating how those who strive against the Lord ultimately come to a sorrowful end, and so we should strive not to be like that. Well, that concludes our little analysis of Judas Iscariot as he is portrayed in the Gospel according to Matthew. It was a shorter little presentation, but I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, and click on the notification bell. Visit jdreiner.com to view all my work in one place. You can send any questions or comments to jonathandreiner@gmail.com. Feel free to use the links in the description to donate to the channel if you want to support the work. And be sure to check the description below to view scholarly sources and other information. Thank you for your attention, and I will see you next time.